Hello and welcome to USA Today Book Club. I am Barbara VanDenburgh, the books editor for USA Today, and I am so happy to be joined today by author Kimberly Shannon Murphy, who's here to discuss her important new memoir, Glimmer, a story of survival, hope, and healing. The award-winning Hollywood stuntwoman, who's been a stunt double for many, many actresses, including Cameron Diaz, who writes the foreword of this book, is a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And she writes powerfully of her recovery from trauma and her will to reclaim her life. So happy to be joined by you, Kimberly, and also by reporter Pamela Avila, who interviewed Kimberly for a piece in USA Today, who's going to be guiding today's conversation. Thank you for joining us. I just want to briefly announce our selection for next month. In June, at a time to be announced very soon, we'll be joined by author T.J. Newman, a former flight attendant turned best-selling author of airplane thrillers whose novel Falling from, I believe, 2021 was an instant bestseller. Her follow-up, Drowning, The Rescue of Flight 1421, is just as exciting as that first book, and she will be here to discuss her page-turning new thriller. And with that, I'm going to hand over the reins to Pamela Avila and Kimberly. Pam, take it away.
Hi, thanks everyone for joining us, and thank you, Kimberly, for being here. Congratulations on a powerful memoir about just really important topics that need to be discussed and talked about more publicly on a bigger scale. I think, we'll just dive right into that. Glimmer, a story of survival, hope, and healing is, like Barbara mentioned, your journey of overcoming childhood sexual abuse by a family member and just the ripple effects that it had on you throughout your whole life. Why is it important for you to tell your story?
It's always been really important for me to tell my story. I just don't feel like I've ever been in quite the place to do it until now. And part of that was because I was healing, I was working on myself, I was trying to build a life for myself, trying to, get away from the toxicity of my family that this abuse was sort of created under, one might say. And I just think it's really, incest is something that we don't talk about enough, and it happens in 90% of people that are abused is by a family member or by someone that the family knows. And I think that it's something that we don't talk about enough. And in writing this, I really realized why that is. There's so many layers. There's so many people that are attached to it that you don't want to upset or disappoint or let down or make them feel any certain way. And I just sort of had to release a lot of that in order to tell my story in the most authentic way that I could.
And it's been a few weeks that the book has been out now. How has it felt to finally have your story out in the world in the way that you wanted to tell it, and knowing that it's just going to empower and just touch the lives of many people who have experienced similar abuse, or just in general have maybe gone through or can relate to those similar, like, complicated family dynamics that you speak of throughout the book. How has the reception been since it's come out?
I mean, it's been really amazing getting messages and comments on my Instagram about people have most of the feedback is, I sat down and couldn't put your book down. I read it in one sitting, kind of thing. It's that type of read. And I think it touches on so many, not only incest, but so many levels of abuse in a family and a toxic family system. And so I think it's relatable to everybody. Mm-hmm. And I wrote this book for survivors, for people like me. And so when I wrote it, I made sure that it wasn't a triggering book. I didn't want it to be something that people that had been through traumatic events in their life, especially sexual abuse, that they couldn't read it, that they had to put it down or walk away from it because it was too much. Like, that was my main goal with this. And I think that we really achieved that. So I'm very proud of that.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that stood out kind of from, just the first page, like the fact that it was written in a way where it isn't triggering for people who have experienced that, but at the same time, it's very palpable what trauma was, endured and overcome. So I think that's very important that you mentioned that you wrote it in that way. That way, it can be used as a resource versus something that's going to further trigger or kind of, take people back to those spaces and to those dark times in their life.
Yes. I think that it's definitely, it's an important, not many people heal from incest. And the reason being is because when we stay in the toxic family system, even if it's not the person who directly abused you, there's a whole system. It's not just the person that you were abused by. It's the whole adult system, the whole people around you that sort of, turn a blind eye or didn't do anything about it that allowed this to happen. And so I think it's so important that we talk about it, because as we then become adults and have children of our own, that we're really aware of where our children are, and that, and I say this to my daughter all the time, just because somebody is an adult does not mean that you should trust them, does not mean that, people have to earn those things from you. And it's not something that you just, because they're older than you, that they automatically get all these things.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's something that's really important in our next generation of children coming into this world, is that I grew up in a generation where it was like, whatever the adult says goes. Your parents were always right. There was no reason for it. It was just what it was. And now I think it's really important that we let our children know that we are not perfect, and that adults are not perfect. And we all have our own story and our own journey that has brought us to where we are. And that, you don't want your child turning 18 and realizing that your parents aren't what you thought they were. So I think that's a really important thing.
And, going off of that about, that you don't want to grow up and just, realize that your parents aren't who you thought they were. I think, you might have experienced that a little bit younger when, I think it was at 15 when you write that your memories of the childhood abuse kind of started to, rise to the surface. And after watching like a Lifetime movie, that's when it kind of clicked of what was going on, and that's when you opened up to your mother. And then from then kind of the floodgates opened, where you also learned that your mother had also experienced childhood sexual abuse by the same family member. So how did you cope, maybe looking back at it now, with realizing that even if your mother wasn't the person you thought she was, how did you kind of accept that or move through that as you grew up?
Well, I didn't really. I had to sort of do that work on my own when I got older. It was definitely, my grandfather, who was my abuser, was, hurt many people. And one of them was my mother's sister, who came forward when she was 9 years old and told her mother that she was being molested by her father. And that's in the book as well. And it was just kind of not really addressed and just sort of dismissed. And so she grew up in a household where she felt like it was her fault, or felt like she was not, she couldn't trust what her feelings were that she was being hurt by her father, and they were dismissed. And so that allowed the abuse to continue on to, other family members and other people. And so that goes back again to what I'm saying about allowing our children to really have a voice and to really listen to them, and not dismiss things or not pay attention to things because someone's this person in everybody else's eyes does not mean that they're not capable of doing something horrible, and that we need to pay attention to that.
Mm-hmm. And right through your book, you write about that safety that you didn't feel as a child, and especially around other adults and your family that are in fact supposed to be your protectors. So as an adult now and as a mother, you just touched on this a little bit, but what does safety mean for you and your daughter, and how have you kind of, if you've reached that point where you feel, finally safe in your own body and in your environment, after years of doing the work to overcome or get to a place where, you are in a better headspace about the trauma you experienced?
I think the biggest thing for me is that we speak our truth in this house, and that my daughter knows that everything is an open book, and we do not, we talk about everything. If there's something on our mind, we have a discussion about it. We use correct words when it comes to our body parts, because I think that's something that wasn't done when I was a kid either. It's like everyone had a nickname for everything. And so that can be very confusing for children. If something does happen to them, they can't articulate what happened, because they don't have the correct even, names for the parts of their body, because they're, everyone makes up a little cute name for something. So, from day one with my daughter, she's always known everything about, we address everything the way that it is, a vagina is a vagina. She knows that's how we talk about things in our house. And we just have a very, very open dialogue all the time. And she knows that no matter what happens in her world, that as long as she speaks her truth, that she will never be in trouble, and that it will always be listened to, and she'll always be validated for her feelings.
Yeah, I think, that's definitely just super important, because, even throughout the book, when you're, when you're writing about going to the doctor's office and getting checkups from the pediatrician, and there's these terms that you've likely hadn't heard at that point. For example, you talk about contracting herpes, and it's something that the doctor says, but then there's pushback from your mother, and it just wasn't accepted, even though it was, case in point said by a medical professional. So I think, definitely the way that you're describing, just being very blunt and honest with your children, that's super important for just adults to do in general. So there's no misconceptions or times when, these things are just swept into the rug.
Yes. And I also just think in general that there needs to be more of an open dialogue just about, I think that when I was growing up, it was like, there was like a certain age when you found out about periods, and there was like a certain age, my daughter's always known, because of my line of work, we travel a lot. So, we're in a lot of airports. She's always in the bathroom with me. We just have always talked about it in a very open way. And I say this in the book, the truth feels so good. Why don't we say it more? And it's so true in every facet of life, period. And I feel that way with her a lot. Is like, I see because I'm so honest with her about everything, it's not a big deal. Mm-hmm. Like, it's like, oh, okay. And, moving on, there's not like this, okay, sit down, and now I'm going to tell you about what happens when you get your period. And it's like this, this traumatizing conversation that you're having with your child, instead of it just being, honest from the beginning. And then it's a non-issue,
Do you think that a lack of honesty in discussing our bodies and how they work, you talked about using the correct words for things, right? And, my family did the same kind of thing, where your family, but like using cutesy words for things. And it was only when you were at a certain age that you use the correct words for things. But even still, it was kind of like, oh, well, the word vagina is kind of gross, even though obviously it's not. Half the world has one. But do you think that lack of honesty, that lack of clarity, that lack of communication about our bodies and how they work and what they do and what they contain, sort of, I don't know, enables a little bit this sort of like sexual abuse and our inability to talk about it frankly with one another when it happens? Do you think that contributes in some way?
Absolutely. I think especially when you're abused from such a young age, like I was, you feel very disconnected from your body, and it doesn't really feel how I felt anyway. How I experienced it was I didn't feel like my body belonged to me. And so I felt very separate from it. And so to even try to describe what I was going through or what was happening with me really was almost impossible. A, I wasn't given the dialogue to do so. And B, it wasn't spoken about in my house. I mean, I remember when my mom, told me about sex, it was like, I think I was 15, and obviously I already knew, but, it was like this, this major, like, okay, after dinner, we're going to go upstairs and sit down and have this, conversation. And I think that it gives us like a false sense of reality in a lot of ways, where we're not able to express ourselves in a way. So you can't explain what's happening to you if you don't even know how to explain it, if that makes sense.
Right.
And I think, you dedicate your book to your Aunt Pat, who we talked a little bit about earlier. And I think it was just really special to get to learn about just that close bond that you had with her and the admiration that you had for her growing up. And I think what stuck out the most was that, she seemed like one of the few people that you felt truly safe around at times. And as you mentioned, she was also abused by your grandfather, and she was the first one in your family to, bring to light this abuse that was going on. And so kind of on the topic of, speaking frankly about this, what has kind of been the biggest lesson that you've learned from her, and, and her speaking her truth and being kind of, the first to try and break that intergenerational trauma and abuse that was going on?
I think for her, it must have been really difficult to speak her truth at such a young age and to be denied the fact that it was a reality. So when I was growing up, she went to Vietnam. She was a nurse in Vietnam, and then she moved to California, and we were in New York. So I didn't really grow up with her. We were pen pals, but we didn't grow up in the same state. More in my 20s, when I moved out to California, was when we became really close. And she was kind of the person who I went to for everything, as far as trying to understand or wrap my head around who my grandfather was and how he was able to do the things he was able to do under everybody's nose. And she was just a really brave, amazing person. And now with all the healing that I've done, I realize that she really just wanted everybody to heal. And the biggest thing that I've learned through my journey is that you're only going to heal when you're ready to heal. And so as much as you want to take everybody along with you, and you want your family to walk that journey with you and to do those things, is everyone's going to do it on their own terms. And some people aren't going to do it at all. And I think that, that was just really hard for her, that was something that, she just wanted so much for everybody. And, she passed away with Alzheimer's, and, never kind of got to see sort of the explosion that's really happened in my family now. But I think that's one lesson I've learned from her passing, is that you can only do the work for yourself, and you can't do it for anybody else. And as hard as that is to swallow, it's the truth.
Sorry, I think I dropped off I was like, what just happened?
I was like, is she just staying very, very still?
Or no, it was my Wi-Fi. I'm so sorry. I apologize. But okay, so yeah, you were just talking about how, healing isn't linear. And I think was that something that you maybe grappled with in the beginning of your healing journey, when, things just became hard, where, healing just wasn't a one-way street, but rather, you're gonna be going through it over and over again. And it's maybe not something that you ever, like we talked about in our interview, one day you're not just gonna wake up and be like 100% okay. It's always going to be in the back of your mind.
Yes. And it's always going to be something that you deal with. And it's just different steps and where you are in your journey. And I think that, I had a great therapist for a really long time that helped me immensely. And then doing the book has been an extremely healing experience for me. And I do a lot of psychedelic work, which has honestly really kind of been the biggest, I would say, transformation for me in my healing journey. I think because I've always been really open to wanting to know what happened to me. And a lot of my family members are the opposite, where they're kind of like, okay, we know that this happened and I just want to move on. And it doesn't work like that, because it comes out through your parenting, or it comes out in your relationship with your partner. It comes out in all different ways in your life. It doesn't just disappear. So for me, I feel like now with my psychedelic work and with all the doctors I've been so amazingly grateful to have now in my life through writing this book, and all of them who've endorsed it, it's really brought me to a whole other level of healing that I don't think I would have ever really reached.
And I think just the aspect of approaching your healing journey through psychedelic work was very intriguing, because I think that's also something that we've just seen, for example, other celebrities be open about. Like Prince Harry comes to mind, Megan Fox and Machine Gun Kelly with stuff that they do. But can you talk to me a little bit more about what led you to prefer doing psychedelic work for unpacking this specifically, and also more of just like, how can we destigmatize psychedelics in the use of therapy as well, since I know that's also something that you touched upon in the book, and how MDMA led therapy is being just used more widely now.
Yes. Well, I was on Zoloft for a really long time. And for me, that was just really just like a numbing agent. That for me, I know everyone has their own experiences with it. I'm sure it has saved a lot of people. But for me, it was just a very numbing experience, which is not what I wanted. I wanted to feel things. I wanted to go through them. I wanted to understand my story and understand what happened to me. So that wasn't really something that worked for me. Dr. Gabor Mate was the one who introduced psychedelics to me and got me a doctor here in LA that I work with. And the MDMA, to be honest, because I'll do that. The first 2 times I did a journey, I just did MDMA. And the third time I did MDMA and mushrooms. And really what it does is it just takes the fight or flight away. And you're able to, it sort of feels like you're in, you completely remember everything. You're completely present and you know everything that's going on. It's not like you're out of your mind or anything. But you're able to tap into a place that you can't normally do if you're not, doing this type of work. And so it made me really be able to meet my inner child. Really is the biggest thing that happened through that kind of work for me. And then I do a lot of IFS work, which is internal family systems, which Dr. Richard Schwartz founded. And that's a lot of work with like different parts of yourself, and how we just sort of have these parts that in his words is sort of like, they kind of get stunted when things happen to us through our childhood, right? So then when we get triggered as adults, and our reaction when we get triggered is actually coming from a child's space sometimes. So you can react as a 7-year-old because you're coming from a place of shame or guilt or all of these other things that you might feel. So you're not reacting as an adult person because something really traumatic happened to you, and then it kind of like stunted that growth, if that makes sense. So I feel doing those 2 therapies together for me has been life-changing.
I just want to share for people listening that there's a really good book that came out last year. It's a novel called The Acrobat by Edward J. Delaney. And it's about like the psychedelic therapies have been going on for, a really long time. They were very experimental in the late 50s and early 60s. And the actor Cary Grant did a lot of psychedelic therapy under the guidance of a doctor. It was very controlled. He did LSD therapy. And that he had a lot of childhood past family trauma that LSD therapy helped him heal from. And so just anybody who's interested, it's my one little contribution that I know. This book, The Acrobat by Edward J. Delaney, talks about, it's based on a true story of Cary Grant's journey with psychedelic therapy.
Yes, if it's, and that's the thing too, it has to be done in the right space. And you do therapy before with this person and you do therapy after with this person. And I think the biggest thing is that also for me is that I was in a safe space. I felt really safe with this woman. And so I was able to experience things in a safe space where I had never felt safe before. So like, that's the biggest thing. And I think that that's when you get to that kind of place and you're able to tap into those spaces that you feel in many instances during my journeys, I would say to her, I need you to tell me I'm safe. I need you to tell me that you believe me. I need you to, these were all like things that were coming from like a deeper childhood wound of not feeling believed or not feeling safe and all these things. And so it's really, it's really amazing, and hopefully it will become legal soon because I think it really will help a lot of people and has helped a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. And how, you talked about just kind of having a better relationship with your inner child through the psychedelic work. How has that relationship helped you with your healing and just in general? Like, why has it been important to kind of get back to having this stronger connection with your inner child that, just didn't feel safe and just wasn't protected as she deserved?
I think for me, I went through a really long period of my life where I was very angry with her. I did not feel connected to her. I felt like it was her fault that this kind of happened. It was confusing to me. Like, why didn't you tell? Why didn't you fight back? Why didn't you? And through my psychedelic work also came a lot of memories. I had a lot of memories when I was doing my journeys. And through that, I realized how hard she actually fought back and how many things she actually did do. And that she was the one who actually survived the worst of all of it. I was just living now and trying to heal it, but she had actually lived it. And so to be able to connect with her like that on that level, literally my first journey was she showed up in front of me, like as my child self, and she just looked at me and said, "What took you so long?" And so for me, it was really necessary to connect with her again and for us to be one person instead of two people, which is what I felt like for a really long time.
Mm-hmm. And did you, also do extensive therapy while you were writing the book? Because, obviously you're, reliving and facing the trauma once again as you're going through the writing process. So how did you handle any triggers, and just how did you take care of your mental health during the process of writing your memoir?
I stopped talking to my family. To be honest, that was one of the hardest things that I've ever had to do. I still talk to my mother, but I do not speak to anybody else. And they say you can't heal around the people that made you sick. And with that said, I don't mean that they're the ones that did this to me, because clearly they're not, but I was still living in this family system that was really toxic and still operating umbrella, as I like to call it, because that's sort of what it feels like. And I realized probably very shortly into me writing the book that having a relationship with them was not serving me, and it wasn't helping me, and it wasn't going to help heal me, and that I needed to step away in order to really see things for what they are. And you can't see things really clearly until you take yourself out of a situation. When you're in it and you're talking to these people every day, or you're having these interactions, you're making excuses, you're kind of in this space that you've always been in. And me taking myself out was necessary for me to write this book. And also, I just really kind of dove back into therapy and did a lot of therapy through it all, and obviously had to take care of myself in that way. So yes.
And yeah, I mean, the importance of therapy is also just a very huge theme in the book that was also just, super great to highlight, because it can still be very much stigmatized within certain communities, or, even within families that don't necessarily, accept therapy as a form of anything. But when it comes to any type of abuse, it's very important to get people the help and resources they need to overcome these things. And what has been your biggest takeaway from years of therapy, or any kind of tips you would give to people that might still be scared to reach out to a therapist first and foremost, and kind of dive into their healing journey?
I think the most difficult thing for people especially that have had a lot of trauma in their life, is that you want to go to one therapist and you want to, tell them all the things, and you want them to be the perfect fit for you. And that's not how it works all the time. Sometimes miraculously you go and see someone and they are the perfect fit. I have not had that experience. I have had to kind of maybe see 7 people before I find the person that is the right person for me, which I think is the hardest and scariest part for people, because nobody wants to sit there and tell their story over and over to a quote unquote stranger. They just want things to work and things to be okay. But in, my opinion, I think that you have to just really, if you're serious about your healing, you have to just really be also serious about the person that you're going to take this journey with on your healing. And it has to be the right fit. It has to be a person, I always say, that's smarter than you are. That you're in a session and you have these epiphanies where they say something to you and you're like, oh, right, I never thought of it like that. Not someone who just feels like a friend that you're having a conversation with. Because we can all do that all day long. It's not going to help get us better. What helps get us better is people that are, really knowledgeable in whatever is going on with us, whatever that might be, whatever you've been through, and that are going to bring you to the next level. And that's a really big deal. And if you're ready to take the step, you have to be patient with finding the right person.
And it sounds like it's the same with medication as well. I mean, you talked about Zoloft not being helpful for you. I went through a similar experience where I had a mental health crisis, and Zoloft was more damaging than it was helpful. But I know it's helped a lot of people. So it's not, if you're on Zoloft or you need Zoloft, don't take that as a warning. I mean, it might work for you. It works for a lot of people. But it sounds like it's a similar journey with medication too. Like, you're not going to get prescribed one antidepressant and then automatically it's going to help or fix everything. You might need to go on a journey of antidepressants, or you might need to try alternative therapies.
Yes, completely. And I think, like you said, it's different for everybody. And I think that if you are prescribed something and you are doing something and it doesn't feel right, or it doesn't feel like it's working for you, then, you need to just have enough strength inside to be like, okay, this isn't, I really, I think there's that hope that you want things to work so badly, but if it's not working, then you need to move on to the next thing if you're really serious about getting yourself to a better space.
And just ultimately, what would you say to readers who have experienced childhood sexual abuse or any other type of abuse, to find, that glimmer of hope and healing in order to just make it out on the other side?
Well, and I didn't know this when I titled the book Glimmer, but they say our glimmers are the opposite of our triggers. Dr. Deb Dana she's written a bunch of books on all of that, which I actually didn't know at the time I named my book. But I think that, it's really important, especially when you've had such large trauma in your life, to just get around the right people. And that's a really difficult thing to do because we're attracted to the wrong people. Because when you've had a past of trauma, you are attracted to people that bring that, because that's what feels comfortable to you, right? Like that's what you lived your whole life. So what feels comfortable to you is to be in a bad relationship or an unhealthy, toxic relationship, to have toxic friends, to be in a toxic system, because anything else, like I remember when I stopped talking to my family, there was this sort of peace that I felt, and it was really uncomfortable. I felt like really uncomfortable. And I remember my husband saying to me, this is just what being peaceful looks like. And it took me a really long time at times I still feel that way. And I think that's something really important to acknowledge, because when you live in turmoil your whole life, you think that that's the way that life should be. And so you kind of seek out that in order to feel comfortable. It's like, oh, this feels comfortable, but it's not the right thing, right? So I think it's all of the parts. It's your friends, it's who you surround yourself with, it's who you have conversations with on a daily basis, is such a huge important part of your healing as well. And even if that means that you have one friend forever, then you have the one friend, the one really good friend that you love, and that gives you that inner peace and that inner joy, and not there's always some sort of like catastrophe drama happening in order for you to feel like you're safe, when it's actually the most unsafe place for you to be.
Well, thank you, Kimberly, for joining us for this month's book club. If you have anything else to tell our readers about your book or about anything else that you have in the works, feel free. The floor is yours. But everyone, go get Glimmer and read this amazing memoir. It's a necessary read for everyone. And again, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. And I will just say I wrote this book for survivors and anyone that's had trauma. And I have said this across the board, like I wrote this for my 15-year-old self. And I know that if I would have had it, it would have changed my life. And so I hope it does that for others.
No, thank you so much for writing the book and for joining us and being so open and vulnerable and sharing so personally of your journey with us. We really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay. Bye.